State of the Union with John King, CNN Sunday, 9 a.m. to 1 p.m. Eastern.
We begin today with the president's overseas trip and the ambitious domestic agenda waiting the president as he returns today from overseas. The trip was 5 days in all, the president traveling from the United States first to Riyadh, Saudi Arabia. Then it was on to Cairo, Egypt, where he delivered his major address to the Muslim world. The president then moved on to Europe, Dresden, Germany. He visited a Nazi concentration camp. Final stop of the trip was here in France. The president visiting Paris, also up to Normandy for the 65th anniversary of the D-Day landing. The trip ended in Paris, which is where this morning we find the president's senior advisor, David Axelrod. David, I want to begin first with the moment. With the new president, we're still seeing many things for the first time. He walked the hallowed grounds of the American cemetery near Normandy. It is a remarkable place. It is a sobering place. I'm wondering if he shared his reflections with you on being the commander-in-chief walking that ground.
Well, look, I think there's an enormous sense of pride that he felt representing the United States of America. It's such an extraordinary, inspiring story of what happened on those cliffs off the beaches of Normandy. And when you stand there and contemplate it, look at those at that cemetery, consider the valor of kids who were barely shaving, and yet they saved the world from the scourge of Nazism and fascism. So I think he felt all of that, and he felt very, very proud to stand there as the President of the United States. It was particularly emotional for him because his uncle, Charlie, was there, who helped liberate the Buchenwald concentration camp. And Charlie, I think, reminded him about his grandfather who served and came across those beaches in Normandy, and an uncle, another great uncle. So, it was an extraordinary day for him, and one I know he'll never forget.
While there in Paris, he announced that Senator George Mitchell, his special envoy to the Middle East, will be going back to the region this week to talk to the Israelis, to talk to the Palestinians. What is the goal of this trip? Because many speak of the peace process, but there really is no process. The Israelis and the Palestinians have not been at the table negotiating in earnest for some time. Is that the goal, to get them back to the table in the near future?
Well, certainly we want to get them back talking to each other. And I think there is a recognition, broad recognition in the region that there needs to be progress. One of the great heartening things about the president's speech in Cairo is the enormously positive reaction it generated across the region and around the world, and from both Israel and the Arab world. We saw positive responses. And when the president talked to leaders in the region and here in Europe, I mean, there's just such a hunger for this process to move forward. So the hope is that Senator Mitchell can get that, can make some progress next week on his visit.
Let's focus on the president's speech in Cairo. Public reactions were overwhelmingly positive, but there was a bit of grumbling from Israelis privately and from some in the American Jewish community back here, not so much at what the president said, but that where he said it. I want you to listen to one line from the president's speech that raised some eyebrows, and it concerns his calling on Israel to stop building settlements. Let's listen.
Israelis must acknowledge that just as Israel's right to exist cannot be denied, neither can Palestine's. The United States does not accept the legitimacy of continued Israeli settlements. This construction violates previous agreements and undermines efforts to achieve peace. It is time for these settlements to stop.
The interesting thing to some, David Axelrod, is that the president said that in Cairo, Egypt, a major Arab capital, and the speech was, of course, covered around the Arab and Muslim world. He said a similar thing in the Oval Office last week with President Mahmoud Abbas of the Palestinian Authority. And many Israelis are asking that you should know that Netanyahu's government in Israel is so fragile that if he did that now, if he stopped the settlements now, his government might collapse. And so they ask the question, why do you keep pushing?
Well, because these are agreements that the Israelis have made in the past. The Palestinians have made agreements in the past that they have not observed. And the president's point in that speech is that everybody has to step up now and meet their responsibilities, because of the prospect of generations more bloodshed, of generations more suffering, is something no one should accept. And I must say that the reason the speech was well received is because it was very candid and it was very clear. And he was very clear to the Palestinians, clear to the Israelis. He was very clear to the Arab world, and he was very clear about what our responsibilities are and have been. And I think that kind of candor clears away some of the debris that has stood in the way of progress. And our hope is that now we can take advantage of that. One thing I would say, John, is one of the most heartening statements came from Shimon Peres, the president of Israel, who called the speech brave and courageous and praised the president for his leadership. I think that was an encouraging statement.
But are you asking, then, to continue the candor? If Mr. Netanyahu's coalition would not allow him to stop settlements, would not allow him to sit down with the Palestinians and start talking about the difficult choices, land for peace, should Mr. Netanyahu then either challenge his own ministers or should he try to form a new government?
John, look, the president's been very clear that he understands that there are enormous difficulties for Prime Minister Netanyahu, enormous difficulties for President Abbas in this process. It's laden with difficulties, and he understands the politics of it. But the stakes are so enormous for Israel, for the region. Israel is our greatest ally in the region. We have bonds that are not just strategic, but bonds of the heart with Israel, and we care deeply about its security, and we want peace to come so that Israel can live in peace, in secure borders, but that's not going to come without people stepping up and challenging the prevailing politics on both sides, and the president is urging them to do that.
Let's focus on something else in the president's speech in Cairo. It is not uncommon, it is considered fair game to be harshly critical of your predecessor here within the borders of the United States. That's how American politics are played. It is rare, though, for a president of the United States standing in the world stage to be so critical of his predecessor. President Obama quite critical of George W. Bush. Let's listen.
Unlike Afghanistan, Iraq was a war of choice that provoked strong differences in my country and around the world. Just as America can never tolerate violence by extremists, we must never alter or forget our principles. 9/11 was an enormous trauma to our country. The fear and anger that it provoked was understandable. But in some cases, it led us to act contrary to our traditions and our ideals. We are taking concrete actions to change course.
Why, David Axelrod, did the president feel it was important, so important, that he would essentially say George W. Bush launched a war of choice and that George W. Bush tortured people?
Well, John, I think that it's important to make clear that he didn't point a finger at George W. Bush, and he didn't offer those observations to make a political point. He offered them to report candidly on the history of the last few years that is well understood and well known. And I think that kind of, you can't be candid about other people's actions and responsibilities and not your own. It wasn't meant to criticize any one person. It was meant to discuss in an open and honest way where we've been, is in order to, as I said, clear away the debris so we can move forward. And I think it was important that he do so.
It was obviously the centerpiece of the trip, a big speech. When a president, any politician, closes the books and walks off stage, he has a feeling for the room. He has a feeling for whether he met the bar he had set for himself in advance. What did he tell you in private about how he thought it went?
Oh, I think he was very happy after the speech. You know, he worked very hard on the speech. He was still tinkering with the speech on his way to Cairo. So he really knew how important the speech was, and he wanted it to reflect exactly his thinking. And I think he achieved that. He was pleased with the response. The audience was engaged, and he appreciated that, and he felt that he said what needed to be said. And so I know him well. I've been with him for a long time. Whenever he can say, you know, I said what I wanted to say, he walks away satisfied, and he was very, very happy with this particular speech.
And how does he respond to those who say he has been on an apology tour, going around the world apologizing for the United States' actions in the past?
I think that that they didn't pay attention to this speech or any of the speeches that he's making, because embedded in this speech was a very strong explication of who we are and what we're all about our values as a country and our history as a country. John, the whole point that he made was there are stereotypes of the Muslim world that have grown up because of a small group of extremists who have been used to define the entire Muslim world. And he said, by the same token, America has been stereotyped in a way that bears no resemblance to who we are. So I think he made a strong statement for our country there.